It's been about 3 months since I've readjusted and refilled my Johnson Su Bioreactor, so I thought it would be nice to give you guys a little bit of an update on how the process is going. I will quickly recap the 4 key principles of the Johnson Su Bioreactor. I will also touch on what you can or should do while managing your Johnson Su Bioreactor or while waiting for it to finish. And finally, I will also give you guys a little sneak peek, so I will be digging down into the medium and then we'll see if we can spot any change going on in there. So like I've said, Dr. Johnson has stated 4 key principles that makes a successful Johnson Su Bioreactor. First of all, it has to be fully aerobic. It has to be static, so no turning the pile. It has to have a high moisture content, so preferably above 70%. And it also has to be a vermicompost, so there's going to be worm activity inside of your medium. So concerning the first key principle of it being fully aerobic, Dr. Johnson has stated that the inside of your bioreactor, so the medium, in my case 100% leaves, should be no further away from ambient air than 12 inches or about 30 centimeters. The main difference between my bioreactor and the original one is that the original one is round and has about 7 big PVC pipes stuck in there for aeration. Mine is a cube, so it's square, and instead of several pipes, it has a single air column. However, my bioreactor still abides by the rules as the contents are no further than 30 centimeters away from ambient air. I've just measured the longest distance, which is the corner to the central air column. That is exactly 60 centimeters, so divide that by 2. From either side, it's 30 centimeters, so it's just fine. Like I've said, I have adjusted my bioreactor a little bit compared to last season, where the medium was fully into contact with the ground, which meant that compost worms could get inside the medium via the soil. However, that also meant that the aeration was less than optimal. Now I have gravitated a little bit more towards the original design, and I have put the whole thing on top of a pallet, which improves the airflow and the aeration a lot more compared to last season. The second key principle is that the bioreactor should remain static, so that means no turning the pile or no turning the insides of your reactor. Normally when you're building up a compost pile, somewhere in between the beginning and the end of the process, you want to turn the compost pile at least once to reintroduce some oxygen, and that will help the entire process. That is not the case with the Johnson Su Bioreactor. Now you're making this bioreactor to introduce fungi into the mix and eventually into your soil. And those fungi create networks, and if you disturb the medium by turning it or start digging into it, you destroy those networks or you rip them apart, and that will hamper and slow down the entire process. So that's another reason why the pile should remain static. Now, I haven't touched this bioreactor or the medium at all ever since I filled it up. However, if you've seen my previous video where I filled up the bioreactor with leaves, then you can see a distinct difference between that video and how the bioreactor looks right now. And that is that the contents has sunk considerably. As in the beginning it was up until here, and now I've just measured it, it is about 30 centimeters down. Now this is not because I have been turning the pile or that I have been jumping up and down on it. This is what you can expect as the contents of your bioreactor start to decay and start to decompose, and they start to compress even up to 50% of its original volume. So don't freak out if you're building your first bioreactor and all of a sudden you see the content sink down. That is to be expected, and it will probably start doing that in the first few weeks. The third key principle is the moisture content. David Johnson has stated it should be above 70%. Now I know there are tools that you can use to measure that. I don't have those. However, I have been watering my bioreactor very consistently through the winter, and I'm going to do that even more. I'm going to up the frequency even more during spring and summer as it gets hotter and hotter. I'm going to take the camera for a closer look, and I'm going to show you what's on top of the surface and what is just beneath the surface, so you can see what kind of a difference that makes. All right, so this is the top layer of the bioreactor. It really looks dry, and if I grab onto some of those leaves, it even sounds very dry. So you might be thinking, well, you have not been watering this enough. However, if I dig just a little bit below the surface, then you can already see the difference between, for example, this part over here, which is the top surface, and this over here, which are the leaves only a few centimeters below. And you can see I've watered this yesterday or the day before, and they are still quite moist, quite wet actually. So that is a good sign that you are watering regularly. That is lovely for us Dutch people to pronounce. Anyway, so if I take it a little bit over here, that's also dry, but only a few centimeters below, it starts to become very dark and it's very moist and damp. So as you can see, the top layer seems very dry, but only a few centimeters below it, it's pretty damp, pretty moist. So I think I'm doing a good job with watering so far. So the fourth and final key principle of the Johnson Su Bioreactor is that it should be a vermicompost, which means that compost worms should be introduced into the mix to speed up the entire process and create that very rich and dark compost in the end. Now, like I said, last year the contents of my bioreactor were fully into contact with the ground, so as they always do, the compost worms found a way inside of the medium and they started doing their work. This year, like I've said, I put the entire thing on top of a pallet, so that means that the compost worms don't have a direct way into the bioreactor. Fortunately for me, on the other side of the bioreactor is my regular compost pile, and that compost pile is full of compost worms. So what I did is I grabbed as many as I could and I sprinkled them on top of the medium inside of the bioreactor, and they quickly wriggled their way downwards because they don't really like sunlight. There's still some compost of the other side on top of the leaves inside of the bioreactor, but that's not a problem at all. Now, there are a few things that you have to keep in mind and you have to stay on top of while managing your bioreactor and to bring it to a successful end. The most important one is, of course, watering. You have to stay on top of it, especially now that spring and summer is arriving here in the northern hemisphere and the days are getting warmer. Today it was a lovely 22 degrees Celsius, but that also means that your bioreactor will dry out quicker. So stay on top of watering, keep that moisture content as high as you can. I will be watering this every other day or so, and when the days are starting to get really hot, I will be probably doing it every day. So keep on top of it and your worms and your fungi will do just fine. Another thing you could do is to introduce and add more worms to your bioreactor, especially if the days are getting warmer. Worms tend to get a little bit more hungry and more active, so that might speed up the process even more, but it's not mandatory if you already have introduced some of them to your bioreactor. If you have some compost from a previous batch from your bioreactor available, then what you could do is make an extract out of that. So that means mixing it with water, sieving that water, and then spraying it onto the contents of your new bioreactor. And what that will do is to introduce more and more spores into the contents of your bioreactor. Now, for me, I have already put some pockets of my finished compost of last year into the entire mixture, so I won't be doing that. But if you haven't done that yet, then I suppose you could still try to make an extract and spray it over the contents of your bioreactor and introduce more spores and more fungi, and that means more fun. So finally, I wanted to give you guys a little bit of a sneak peek and dig a bit deeper down into the medium than I already have, even though I don't really want to disturb the bioreactor, but let's have a look. All right, let's pick this spot over here. Again, if I only remove the top layer, you can see it becomes a lot darker over here. However, you can still see that it's a very distinct and very clearly still leaves and not any compost-like structure, so not much going on over here. Let's dig a little bit deeper if I can. Let's see what's going on over here. Now, I realize this is a little bit dark to see, but I'll just describe it to you. Right now, this is about 15 centimeters deep. I'm just gonna pull out a little bit of the contents and see what's going on over there. So, still a lot of leaves, and actually not as many, or actually no worms, so they might be in another spot. There is some decomposition going on over here. Some leaves have started to pulverize a little bit, if that is the correct term. So yeah, there is some activity. There's even some growth over here. This is a leaf. I'm not really sure what, but doesn't really matter. But yeah, this is what you could expect after 3 months of letting your bioreactor do its thing. So not a lot of stuff going on yet, but you know, this is a game of patience. So just let it be, water it, and you'll do fine in about 9 to 12 months. All right, that's the situation of the Johnson Su Bioreactor after 3 months of sitting there and not doing much. I hope you've enjoyed this little update, and I think I'll be making another one in about 6 months, so we'll be hitting that 9-month mark, and we'll see how things might have changed over here. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one. Bye-bye.